Great. Well, welcome everyone to today's second part of the Welcoming Economies series for 2025, hosted by Welcoming America. And again, I'm Steve Tabachman. I'm the Executive Director of Global Detroit, and we're partnering with Welcoming America through our National Pluribus initiative. Today, we're going to go through what we call Welcoming Economies 101 on how you build inclusive communities for growth. And so this is a training that we've modernized a little bit. Many of you may have gone to other Welcoming Economies trainings over the years that Welcoming America has provided. This one's a little bit updated. Not next month, but in 2 months, on November 12th, we will have our third session on supporting immigrant-owned small businesses during this hostile climate, and what are the programs that Welcoming Initiatives can offer their local immigrant small business community to help them out. Next slide. So the learning objectives of today's Welcoming Economies 101 webinar is to identify basic facts about why immigrants are vital to our economy and our economic future. This is language that every Welcoming Initiative should have at their disposal, and we're going to give you some sources on how you can tell that story of how important immigrants are. This is a critical opportunity in terms of messaging, given what is going on with anti-immigrant policies. We will talk about the core concepts of immigrant inclusive economic development and why they matter for local growth. Explore a theory of change that you can use for welcoming economies. And this is really what I think is unique about this area, and what we've modernized in this training is it's less about running a whole bunch of programs that you need a lot of staff and a lot of money for, and more about if you're just one or two people in a welcoming office and you are doing all 7 aspects of welcoming, how can you be impactful in the economic welcoming space? And we've thought through that in this theory of change. And finally, we'll have an opportunity to apply these concepts in practice. There's a handout that we will post in the chat at that time that you can run around. But I am going to be looking for volunteers. So if as you're going through this, you're like, first of all, be thinking of questions. But second of all, if you really want to like roll up your sleeves and try out this theory of change with some issues that you have in your community, we're going to have an opportunity to practice together. So I think that gets us to the introductions portion of today's webinar. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, great. So just the agenda. Oh, go back one. I'm sorry. If you go back one, we're going to do introductions. We're going to talk about why welcoming economies, again, the case making. We'll go through also that theory of change. We'll do the group activity, and then we'll wrap up. And that will be the agenda. And with that, I think you can take the slides down. We just wanted to spend a second introducing ourselves. And then specifically, yes, there will be slides that we send out, but I think you're going to see that there aren't that many slides. I think there's only 5 core training slides, and a lot of this is going to be verbal. But I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. We're a little big with 46 participants from going around the room and having everyone grab the mic for a second. So it'd be really great if people could put their name and organization in the chat. And I have a question for you, which I will put in the chat, or maybe one of my team members would be even better, is what are you hoping to get out of this training today? If there's something specific that you've been thinking about in terms of welcoming economies, or just around the economic inclusion of immigrants that you're hoping we're going to address, adding that to the chat would be really helpful. And thank you, Norma, for being the first person to introduce themselves in the chat. But it's really helpful for us to see who is here today. They're interested in the resources that Welcoming America has. Some people are just dipping their toe into the economic lane. Innovative ways that the world, oh, sorry, this is going so fast. That places around the country are finding ways to still advance welcoming policies in a tough environment, strengths-based coaching to career readiness, deep interest in the undocumented, helping to support people who are looking for business licenses. Great. I'll give it one more minute and then we can bring the slides back up.
I'm just seeing this one from Emily that's looking for resources to help execute an economic mobility strategic plan.
Cool. And I'm glad to see our friends from Oakland 80 here. It's good to
Dubuque.
connect on a national webinar, even though we're in the same region. Skilled immigrant certification and just expanding people's knowledge. These are great reasons to be here. And, there are a lot of very specific things. So maybe we can get to some of those. We'll try to make more room for questions because I see some people have come with very, very specific needs, which is great. And we're glad that you're here. All right, we can get back in and let's jump into today's presentation. I see rural communities represented. All right. So let's talk about immigrant inclusive economic development. All these terms can be used synonymously. That's the language that Global Detroit uses, but we were an organization that was birthed out of a local chamber of commerce. Others may use welcoming economies. Others might use inclusive economic development or other things. They're all, or immigrant economic development is a term we used to use, but I think immigrant inclusive economic development is more apt. All right, we can go to the next slide. So I think it's really important for welcoming initiatives to be able to talk about how important immigrants are to our communities. And in particular, I think it's critical with the kinds of attacks and demonization that has been going on, really going back to the campaign of 2024, to create positive messages around immigrants. Of course, those messages should include things about human rights and basic decency and draw from faith communities. And in talking about the economic messaging, I by no means mean to exclude other reasons to be engaged in welcoming work or to be promoting immigrants or be thinking about refugees. Those other reasons are critical. But at the same time, I think that there's a very positive story to tell about what immigrants mean to our communities and to our country and how they add to our economic growth in ways that benefit everyone, right? So I'm going to spend a second just talking a little bit about the statistics around some of these things, and then we're going to give you some resources. So you shouldn't necessarily try to write down every specific, but really just listen for what feels true about my region. If Steve says something about high skilled immigrants or international students, do we have a lot of universities or what? So in any event, just I think listen more than try to transcribe and think more about your own community and what rings true. So first, population growth. And many areas of the country, particularly once you leave the Sun Belt, are very much concerned about population growth. In Michigan, our governor created the first cabinet level position of a chief growth officer. That's a growth for population growth. We've had a real bipartisan effort about saying we want to grow the population. The mayor of Detroit has said that the number one metric on his performance was the population growth of the city. Most areas embrace population growth. Now, again, there are some areas of the country that have, particularly the Sun Belt, that have rapidly growing populations, and this might not be as important to those areas. But throughout the Midwest, the Northeast, even some of the West, population growth remains very important. And there's good reason. We are rapidly aging as a country, and we call it a silver tsunami, and it's real. And within 9 years from now, 2034, it's estimated that there will be more senior citizens living in America than children. First time ever in the nation's history. And so that means that there are going to be fewer workers to support, people live longer to support more, non-workers, and working age people are more important. In 2000, just 25 years ago, there were 31 million immigrants in the United States. Today, there are over 50. That's a 67% growth rate in the last 25 years. And immigration has been responsible for 33% of all US growth rate. And in fact, just in the last year, after cities lost population, 54 of the 55 largest metros saw growth in the 2024 census. 21 of those 54, immigration was all of the growth, net growth. And for 45 of the 54 growing metros, immigration was at least half of the growth. So your largest communities in the country and cities are growing. Rural areas all across the country are worried about population, and population growth is important. Second thing is spending power. So according to the American Immigration Council, immigrants in the United States represented $1.7 trillion in spending power. That's trillion with a T, not with a B. $1.7 trillion. They paid over $650 billion with a B in state, local, and federal taxes. So every state, in Michigan, all of our population growth over the last 5 years or 25 years is through immigration. And then their immigrants are 7% of our population. They spend $23 billion in total, and they make $8 billion in tax payments. Next is critical and complementary talent. So immigrants provide critical labor force to key areas of the economy. Depending on the area of food production, immigrant labor makes up 45% of the livestock workers to 60% of the crop production workers and 73% of all agricultural workers. Roughly 30% of all construction workers, and that's 40% in California and Texas, are immigrants. So when people are talking about housing issues and needing to build more housing, immigrant labor force is critical to that. 41% of all the home healthcare workers are immigrants. 35% of building custodians and groundkeepers. So it's not just sort of physical labor that immigrants are important to. It's also some of our most high-skilled positions, where 48% of all the computer and science occupations in the United States, computer science occupations, are filled by foreign-born workers. 31% of all high-wage computing jobs, 39% of all software developers who have wages over $125,000. Immigrants are 28% of all our physicians in the country, and a large numbers of our nurses, physicians, assistants, and pharmacists. 25% of all our electrical engineers, 20% of our engineers. The numbers go on and on, so you get the sense. And this is they're filling jobs and are important to the labor force in ways in which there aren't as many U.S.-born workers willing to take those jobs. And that's not just lower wage, physically backbreaking jobs. It's also very high-skilled, highly educated jobs. They tend to be very complementary forms of labor. And that's even true when people say large numbers of low-skilled workers are going to crowd out the labor force. That's not been borne out by economic studies. International students in higher education, which is a critical issue right now. There's something called duration of stay rule that's been proposed by the federal government that will make it much harder for international students, require a lot more paperwork, biometric work, etc. Comments are due by the end of the month. You can follow up with me, and we'll be launching a website in the coming days on how to file comments. There are currently 1.1 million students, international students, studying in the United States. It's about 5% of all the students. More than 50% of them are in STEM fields. Those students spend $43.8 billion every year in the U.S. economy. It makes international education the 7th largest service export product in the United States. And immigrant students account for 70% of all the graduate students in America in electrical engineering and computer science, and basically 50% of all the graduate students in STEM. They make up about 12% of all the students at public universities, but account for as much as 30% of all the tuition dollars. In terms of the innovation economy, immigrants have been at the leading edge of American innovation and science. In the last 125 years, Americans have won 319 Nobel Prizes in science, and 36% of those US winners were immigrants. And over the last 25 years, the number's risen to 40% of all the US Nobel Prize winners in science are immigrants. They are founders of startup companies. Over the last 25 years, about a quarter of all the startup companies in the United States have an immigrant founder or co-founder, but that becomes even more true when we talk about the most successful startup companies, what we call unicorns. These are startup companies backed by venture capital that have a market valuation of $1 billion or more, and 55% of the unicorns in the United States have an immigrant founder or co-founder. It's not just high-tech businesses, it's also Main Street businesses. So, and it's been part of the American story for generations. So 40%, 46% of the Fortune 500 firms, the largest firms in America, were started by immigrants or their first generation children. Excuse me. Those firms had $8.6 trillion in income, essentially twice the gross domestic product of Germany, Japan, or India. They employed 15.5 million people worldwide, or 67,000 jobs per company. But then when we get to Main Street businesses, about a quarter of all the Main Street businesses in America are immigrant started. 33% of the restaurants, 50% of the grocery stores and dry cleaners. Later this year, we're expecting a partner of ours, Build From Within Alliance, to come out with updated data from the Immigration Research Initiative on the Main Street ownership rates for immigrants. And lastly, I just want to talk briefly about the export economy. There's research that when more immigrants move to your community, your exports to their home countries goes up. This creates more jobs and taxes for your community. And in fact, there are something called high export firms. These are firms that more than half of their income comes from exports. And of those high export firms, 50.5% of all the high export firms in America are immigrant owned. So these are all statistics. If you go to the next slide, and you'll get the slide deck. Yeah.
This is great. I'm just seeing a little in the chat here about sort of like where these statistics are coming from. And I know they all live in your brain, which is phenomenal. Are we going to share some resources later that show them in writing?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I mean, there's a lot of places that they come from. They're not like one guide to the immigrant impact. But if you go to the next slide. There you go. Right on cue. So the first place to start is maptheimpact.org. This is a site run by the American Immigration Council. What you'll see is studies like that one on the left that are often multiple pages. And you can look by state, by congressional district, and then there are many other studies, sometimes by metro, that have been done. They look at basic census data. They will tell you the share of the population that is foreign born, the growth in the immigrant population compared to the growth of the US born population, the spending power and tax contributions of those immigrants, the share in of the labor force and what industries in which immigrant labor thrives. Some of the more extensive reports, and I don't know at what level they do each of these reports, but this is one that we commissioned for Michigan. There's a whole page on refugees, right? And the economic impact of refugees. There's a whole page on, I saw in the chat before, undocumented persons in Michigan. How much do they spend a year? How much do they contribute? What degrees they have, where they are. So lots of information. And that is the number one place I would start in. If you don't have any of the economic data, go to maptheimpact.org. It's got an easy map you can click on. You can try and find it on the state, county, metro, congressional level. Not every one of those levels has every county or every metro level, but every state has a report, and I think every congressional district as well. and then most of your larger counties and metros. Another place to go is that there's a wide range of studies at the American Immigration Council that you'll have to peruse through those studies. They are grouped by topics. These are all studies that the American Immigration Council has done, and they have a wide library. I will mention that we are thinking about building a library that helps you get to these facts quicker, to help tell more positive narratives around immigration. Open Doors data is another source that is very specific to international students and international student spending in your state. They come out every year with updated reports on the number of international students and the jobs created and spending created by those students on a state-by-state basis. The Migration Policy Institute is the fourth bullet on here. They have a lot of demographic information for each state that is slightly different than the map the impact. So if you're not finding a statistic that you want to know about, apparently the migration policy link does not work. So maybe we can see if we can find that. And then, as I said, we hope to be coming soon to have a data library in the coming months, but I would look for that more towards the end of the year. But if there was stuff that I said that you're interested in, I'll make sure my email, I'll put it in the chat right now, that I said that you're interested in, you're like, I can't find it. Let me know. I'm happy to help you find it. And Sloan is right. I've been living and breathing this data and these statistics in ways of trying to talk to policymakers, economic developers, and regular folks for 15 years now, because I do think the data is really powerful and pretty much on our side. So if there's any burning questions, I can pause for a second, but or you can put them in the chat. I'm sorry, I missed the other ones, but if you want to move to the next slide, we can also do that. All right, so let's talk about when we say welcoming economies or immigrant inclusive economic development, what does that mean? And I really think this statement that the intentional inclusion of immigrants into economic development strategies, policies, practices, and programs is what it's about. So for us, it's less about, and we do run a variety of programs at Global Detroit. It's less about programs that are solely focused on immigrants and more about how are we building inclusion for immigrants in the economic development sphere and strategies that do we know what impact on U.S. economy if we had no immigrants? Emily, there are some studies, I don't know where they are off the top of my head, that are like the loss of immigrants and what that would mean. I know that the American Immigration Council did a report on what a mass deportation would cost the U.S. economy towards the end of 2024. So it would be on that site of the various studies from the American Immigration Council. All right, let's go to the next slide. It's a kind of a complicated slide. So this graphic on the left is what we developed, particularly Sloan and I and some of our strategic thought partners in 2018 or so. Really, when we realized that after Trump first got elected, that we were not going to get to our mission of building an immigrant inclusive regional economy that was a high growth economy by just working on programs that, suddenly one presidential election threatened existentially all the work that we were doing. And so we needed to think about more rooted systems level changes that could help us get to where we needed to go. So I often describe this circle, this very virtuous circle on the left, as a Mobius strip. And you could think, and if you know a Mobius strip, it seemingly has two sides, but if you put your finger on one side and you trace it all the way around, you end up being on the same side, even though it looks like the other side. So I like to start in that upper left-hand quarter with engagement. And I sometimes say the two seemingly different sides are, sometimes we engage the immigrant community, a refugee community, international students in a neighborhood, a bunch of ethnic community leaders from a new immigrant group, right? So we're working with an immigrant community. And sometimes we think on the other side are the non-immigrant communities. We might be working with a mayor, with a chamber of commerce, with the regional economic development organization, with a university, with just a company, a private company. And in both sides, like we like to go through the same process. And that is, it starts with engagement. And that is really deep listening, right? What are your aspirations? What are your threats? What are you hoping to get to? What problem are we trying to solve? So the mayor of Detroit says, population growth is my number one metric. That's a problem or an opportunity that he's trying to solve, right? International students say to us, we're having difficulty finding jobs after we graduate. Refugees may be saying, we're having trouble finding housing. Refugee resettlement agencies were trouble having housing. Or the governor comes into office and announces as her first economic development strategy, we want to upskill, improve the education and workforce skills of the Michigan workforce. That is important to our economic future. So once we understand the aspirations, the needs and problems, we then begin in our second phase, which is research. And research really is of two kinds in terms of this process for us. First is kind of the research I sort of just ran through, right? Like, what are the demographic numbers? What do the research studies say about immigrants? That's one whole set of research. So if the mayor says to me, I want to grow the population, and we say, 54 out of the 55 largest metros grew, and in 45 of those 54, at least half of the growth came from immigration, and in nearly 30 of them and nearly 3/4 of them, all of the population growth came from immigration. It seems that, and also that none of them grew without immigration growth. It seems like immigration is, the research says that for you to grow your population, you probably need a component, you may need a component of immigration growth to get there. And so that's the promise, right? Like that's how that research would work. Similarly, if the governor says, I want 60% of the workforce to have a college degree or professional credential by the year 2030, and we're at 45%, and that means we need to add 700,000 workers with degrees and credentials. And we say, given the immigration growth that we've seen over the last decade, if we do nothing, 65,000 more college-educated immigrants will move to our state. That's the kind of research that we're talking about. Like, you should care about this issue. And then the next question is like, what can we do to facilitate that, right? The second kind of research is best practices, and I'm realizing now that we took away some of all the focus on programs, but there's a old immigrant economic development guide on the Welcoming America website. There's also the I think we called it the playbook, which is an update of that guide. So Welcoming America's website is probably the single greatest place, but you also go to the Global Detroit website, and there are publications on some best practices. Unfortunately, there's not one best practice manual library, and networks like Welcoming America's Welcoming Economies, like our Pluribus, and just word of mouth are how you, at this stage, most readily find out about best practices. You could always shoot Lola and Megan an email or other Welcoming America staff and say, we're interested in helping our small business community. What programs exist that we should look at? What models? Or you can email myself, Sloan, and Lauren the same question. We'll get back to you. So those are the two types of research. And sometimes we might not know, and you're saying, I am working with this private employer and they're already hiring immigrants, but they want to create a more welcoming workplace. What resources exist? And we might have to run out and find the research, like who's got a tool or who's got a training to help workplaces become more welcoming. All right, so now we have an impetus for action, a desire for action. We know we've got research on why immigrants are important to helping solve that problem, and we've got best practices. So it's time to put our plan into place. And what we had to come up with was this idea of demonstration and enlist. So the idea is that sometimes we need to demonstrate this inclusive practice. So an example for us is international student retention. We know that international students are 70% of the graduate students in electrical engineering. Our state economic development office has said electrical engineers are critical to the state's future. We are the automotive design capital of the world. There is more lines of code in your dashboard of the typical car than there is in a commercial jetliner. Auto design requires electrical engineers. We have a shortage. We need to hire more. And so it's like, great, we should be thinking about pathways for these international students to get to private sector employers. And what we do is we set up a program like, how could we do that? How could we help connect graduating international students and employers? And we'll do job fairs and we'll do all these different activities. But ultimately, our goal is enlistment. So the demonstrate is like, we're going to set up the program. The enlistment is, if this were really working and there was an inclusive practice in place, you wouldn't need a program to make this connection. So there's research that the Western states of the United States, particularly Washington, Oregon, and California, retain international students at twice the rate of the rest of the country. That if you go 10 years out after graduation, roughly 60% of the total number of international students are still working in those three states, where the rest of the country is more towards 30%. So we're not necessarily trying to solve this our point is that there isn't a program in the western part of the country. They're inclusive already. They already understand this talent base. They're already exercising the change that we are emanating to do. In the short term, and I mean short term meaning 5 or 10 years, we need to run a program to help highlight this opportunity for our employers. Let me give you another example. It would be small businesses. When we started at Global Detroit, there were no small business programs offering anything with a bilingual service. There were no full-time small business program officers that were bilingual in Detroit, and no programs. So we created a program specifically designed to both serve small business owners who were African American and immigrant business owners. Over time, all of the small business programs in Detroit seem to have woken up to the fact that there are a number of immigrant small business owners. And it is now common practice that most of those organizations have bilingual services and offer important announcements in multiple languages. And so one might say that we've created that. And we could step back from running a specific program for immigrants. So you're always playing with this, like, are we running a program or are we engaging the broader sector? I also want to say that you don't need to demonstrate a program sometimes. You could go right to enlisting. And this becomes particularly important for those of you who are running a welcoming initiative and you're just 1 or 2 staff people and you're serving an entire metro, and welcoming economies is just one of 7 things that you're doing. You're working on policing policies and education policies and healthcare and and civic engagement and all these kinds of things. You don't have time to develop, run, and fully support the small business program. But the idea is, can you approach those small business providers with and engage them, understand like, oh, we're trying to get more loans out. Oh, we're trying to help the businesses that have only 1 employee expand into bricks and mortar spaces, whatever their goals are. Show them the research on Main Street business ownership, right? Come to them with saying, like, this is a program that other small business development centers, model programs have done around the country, and sort of enlist them into running a program or to adopting an inclusive practice. Like, maybe you ought to be offering your services in multiple languages. Maybe you ought to be canvassing immigrant communities, et cetera, et cetera. And then for us, this virtuous cycle doesn't end there, because it's just like if you've done trainings on systemic racism, right? It's like peeling the layers of an onion. So, okay, now we've built some awareness among employers that international student talent is critical to the supply of electrical engineers. We've got them that they're hiring those engineers, but then we would check in and they would say, well, we're hiring this, we understand this talent pool, but we're having a hard time creating making it so that our systems gel and that our long-term staff is working well with the new staff. So now we start talking about building welcoming workplaces, right? You keep going around this circle, building different layers of inclusion over time and checking in, and doing it with both communities. Our international students experiencing greater pathways to employment, and our employers finding that by opening their doors to international student talent, they're solving talent problems, right? And you keep going around that circle. Let me pause there for a second to see if there are any questions, because the next part of this would be to jump in to put these practices in place. Oh, I want to tell you one story. Let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry. So with that rubric, probably our greatest success has been what we call the Michigan Global Talent Initiative. And I've alluded to this. So in 2019, Gretchen Whitmer started as governor of the state of Michigan. And she kicked off her governorship by a State of the State address in which she doubled down on her campaign pledge to fix the damn roads, and then announced a new strategy, which was 60 by 30. 60% of the Michigan workforce would have a college degree or professional credential by the year 2030. And in 2019, only 45% of our workforce had a degree or credential. According to our friend Amanda Bergson-Shilcock at the National Skills Coalition, many of you may know her, Michigan was the 41st state to announce a post-secondary degree or talent initiative like 60 by 30. The quintessential one that most people who are in that space know about is 55 by 25, which is Tennessee's initiative, but you get the sense, right? People identify a specific number of the workforce that will have post-secondary degree, credential or degree, and by a year by which they will obtain that. So we walked into the office of 60 by 330's door and said, hey, have you thought about the role that immigrants will play in this strategy? We came with our demographic data, that first part of research. They said, no, we haven't thought about this at all. We said, well, just looking at the data, looking at 2011 to 2018, if you extrapolate that to 2030, and that includes 2 years under President Trump, we will get 65,000 more college-educated workers in the workforce and 20,000 at the census say have some college or an associate's degree. And their answer was, that's mind-blowing. Our number was 700,000. We haven't grown the population substantially in Michigan in decades. So if you just do how many people are in the workforce and how do you get 15% more with college degrees or credentials, we need 700,000 workers. The nice thing for us, sorry to run through all these numbers, is that 250,000 will happen naturally based on the college degree levels and credential levels of the people who will be retired in the next 11 years versus those coming in. So the younger crew has more college education, more likely to have a professional credential, and just the replacement of workers by new workers based on birth rates and retirement rates means that the real number for the state to solve was 450,000. And they had added up all kinds of different programs, right? What if we create free community college? What if we invest in skills training? What if we do this? And they had these buckets of how many they could add up to 450,000. And along we came and said, you haven't even thought about this, but we just solved 65,000 or 50% of your initiative. So they were like, that's amazing. And then we said, well, what if we actually invested in this strategy to try to make more of that, right? And so we spent the summer working with the Workforce Development Agency, with the Office of 60 by 30. We brought in our state ONA, which is the Office of Global Michigan. We brought in a couple chambers of commerce. Eventually, we brought in some national partners like the American Immigration Council, Upwardly Global, World Education Services, and some Migration Policy Institute, National Skills Coalition. And we crafted a plan, and that plan had it's a 30-page plan. It had all kinds of budget. It had policies in there, like driver's licenses for undocumented persons. We thought that was important to getting people to college to get the degrees that they need, et cetera. And And then eventually what ended up happening is it took about 3 or 4 years. We had to form a statewide business coalition that believed in this plan, about 25 organizations. And then we took to the legislature this concept that if we got $25 million over 5 years, we could make Michigan a national leader in skilled immigrant integration programs, in international student retention, in worker-based ESL programs, in attraction programs. And we put the first investments from a state into community colleges, not to help scholarships, but to help inclusive practices and how we transform community colleges. And believe it or not, we got the first $5 million allocation from a Republican-controlled legislatures, Republican majorities in the House and Senate. And then they flipped to Democrats, and we got another appropriation from the Democrats. And now we're in a mixed legislature and going after the third year. I will also say that out of this initiative, we built a partnership with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which we never had before in our first 10 years. This is their talent attraction initiative. You can see who they're marketing to, right? This is some kind of STEM worker. I don't know what kind of machine that is, but it seems like it's technical to me. And this seems to be, somebody that would make our foreign-born residents attractive. And this is being advertised all across the country, right? And there are other subjects that are also clearly appealing to a more diverse ethnic community to come to Michigan. So, for us, we would have never, this is so much more funding than we've ever received from the 10 foundations we've been working with for 10 years, right? And what we have is like every step of the way, we recreated our skilled immigrant integration program with the Michigan Works Association, which is our state's workforce system, right? So we're not running this as like an outside either refugee agency or immigrant only agency, but we have embedded job coaches that work directly with immigrant professionals, college educated immigrants who are underemployed, one-on-one, helping them connect with upwardly global software licenses and look for jobs. And, they're helping spread the word about this population all across our mainstream workforce development agencies, right? So that should our funding go away, this awareness will stay within the workforce system, we believe, for decades to come. So that's a good place to pause for questions before I jump into a sample exercise. And also now is a good time to put in the chat, again, the kind of handout for the exercise. Are there any questions, comments before we get into practicing this work? Sorry to talk so much. All right, well, let's go to the next slide. Don't hesitate to, if you want to download, if you didn't get the email when you pre-registered with this handout, it's in the email it's in the chat that Lauren just posted. But in short, this exercise is, it's time to practice this theory of change, right? And again, what I think is powerful about this is I think this is work that potentially one or two people in a welcoming office can implement. You don't need to have 15 staff people, and you don't necessarily need to raise, we're spending over $1 million a year just on international student retention in Michigan, have 5 full-time staff people working on that. This is suggesting there's a different way to go about this without running that kind of massive program or getting somebody else to run your massive program. So the goal here is we're going to identify an economic development strategy that's a priority to your organization or to your region. Like you may know that, in Iowa, population growth is really important, or upskilling the workforce is really important, or getting startups to your community is important. Then we'll talk about how do you do the demographic research? How do you do the best practices research? And then we'll think about how can we design a demonstration project, and how do we move that project to broader adoption by mainstream actors and other partners such that it lives beyond just a program that's helping a small cohort of individuals. So you can take down this slide and we can just interact with each other. I wanted to know, here's the scary part, if there are any volunteers in among the 46 of you who might be willing to work with me on walk through this process. You don't have to, you're not supposed to have the answers, right? This is an opportunity actually to get, right? I don't know if I call myself the Cadillac version, but maybe the Ford Explorer version of coaching one-on-one for your economic issue. And just play with it, right? So I just need a brave soul, and I know sometimes being in front of everyone. I know I think Alex Beck is gone. I don't know if Faisal is there and she's willing to work with me. I don't know if she's
I'm here, Steve. I can.
You're willing to? All right.
Yeah.
Great. So Faisal, why don't you introduce yourself to the room?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Faisal Akintola. Currently with Pittsburgh tomorrow. I think I've been here since May. Formerly, I used to lead the work on immigrant refugee inclusion for in the city of Pittsburgh for Mayor Perduto and partially for Mayor at Gainey as well. So happy to be on another side of things, still working on immigrant inclusion.
Yeah. So tell us a little more about Pittsburgh tomorrow. Like, what is your guys'
For
mission? What's your
sure.
work?
Yeah, so Pittsburgh Tomorrow, it's about 2 years old, and the sole purpose is to focus on attracting and retaining people in the Pittsburgh region. Our CEO is always saying like there are two ways to grow a population: more births than deaths, and or really being intentional about recruiting and attracting immigrants. So our goal is we have different initiatives that we're working internally with our leadership core, which one of my colleagues is helping to spearhead, really having young people connect to place in Pittsburgh. And they actually had a program happen today where they kicked off cleaning up the city for the NFL draft, in time for the NFL draft, coming in April next year. We have one around storytelling, so really talking about how immigrants are really viable and why we need to be more welcoming as a community. So really storytelling piece. We have the Newcomer Center in which I'm kind of working on actually having a physical space to help welcome people, help them connect to resources, serve as a third space, kind of to really help create that sense of belonging for people, and a couple of other projects that we're doing as well. So yeah.
So that is fantastic. But I just want to back up, right? Like at the beginning of Pittsburgh Tomorrow, somebody said we need to grow this population, right?
For sure.
And I would assert that at least a third and probably more than half of you have somebody in your region who's in the economic development or public policy space that is an advocate for attracting people to your region. They may have all kinds of preconceived notions about immigrants or immigrants might be totally off their radar, but somebody started with that basic question of like, we got to grow the population. And then somebody, it sounds like Faisal's colleague, who's the director, he was clear that like either we have to have higher birth rates or death rates, which is just a simple fact, or we got to attract people. And so then that would lead to, so that one is we've identified the strategy, right, which is population growth. And then the second thing is like, the second question on this handout is, what are some of the demographic research questions you might have related to this issue, and what resources might you consult to learn more about that? So, Faisal, if they looked at any demographic information or anything like that when they came up with their bullish support for immigration as a strategy?
Yes, I might not be able to tell you verbatim because our CEO is a journalist, so he spent so much time comparing the city with so many other cities for a long time. I know because he's also a data nerd, Steve, just like yourself. You can kind of spew like, oh, out of 300 plus metro areas, Pittsburgh ranked the lowest in terms of growing as a population. That's something that he tends to say. So I think he has looked at some data to kind of help inform his decision. And I'll just say, like, with you saying that too, I know as I go around and we talk to people around this initiative, we've heard a lot of people, and I'm sure like other colleagues on the call might say this, where there are a lot of different people who have tried to do things in the past, right? Like, oh, let's do this to attract populations, let's do this. But sometimes it starts, and then for some reason, there's no funding, things kind of die off. So he just kind of said it's not going to be something we do partially. It's going to be our sole focus is to address this issue.
That's great. Yeah. And usually, I mean, I think part of this approach about building support in I need a better term than mainstream, but existing institutions, maybe that aren't focused solely on immigration, is that, there's going to be a Detroit Economic Growth Corporation or a Michigan Economic Development Corporation. There's been one for 30, 40 years, and there's going to be one for another 30, 40 years. And so if we can build the sort of, values and ethics and vision within those organizations, the funding for a specific immigrant only program may ebb and flow, and may go away. But if everyone around the table knows we're not going to get there without immigration, they're going to start thinking about, hey, that next ad that says like coming to Pittsburgh, maybe we should, have some diversity in that ad because those are the numbers that grow our population. So on this one, you could be looking at, just the statistics around population growth for the region that have been existing in the past. You can look at death rates and birth rates, and then you could do this comparison population of like how have we grown compared to others, and then this comparison population around, communities that have grown from immigration. I would just note, like, this is why, like, a great email to us might be helpful. I know that David Kallick has done a lot of research of looking at the Immigration Research Initiative, looking at, metropolitan area growth and the role that immigration has played in, just the statistics that I provided earlier today. So that is some research about demographic. But when you think about best practices, and you've started to identify third spaces and some other ways in which you may include immigrants in that population growth attraction, where might you go to find best practices around how to include immigrants or to work on immigration as part of your population growth? Any thoughts about where they went or where you personally would go? Who would you call? What sites would you see?
That's good. I would say one, joining calls like this, maybe. Two, I also just kind of searched in terms of what are other cities doing in terms of attraction. And you tend to see a lot of like incentivizing, right? West Virginia has an incentives program. North Carolina has, people have different ways of trying to attract people. And also even talking to locals, right? I think so. We know Duolingo, who is one of the our companies here that did a huge, bold billboard in San Francisco saying, hey, like move to Pittsburgh, you could actually buy a home here, in trying to recruit for his company, but at the same time trying to attract people here. So, I mean, it's listening and reading about different things per se, but I mean, we're always open to hearing more for sure.
Yeah. I know also a common talent attraction one is this idea of boomerangers that like, oh,
Yeah.
if we had people who grew up in Grand Rapids or Pittsburgh or Detroit come back.
Yep.
The problem is they went to college and then they got attracted somewhere else. And now that they're going to have kids, they want a more affordable place. They want to be near their parents and all this other kind of stuff. I promise you data is on our side that if you look time and time again at what has caused growth, it's not people moving back. It happens in bigger numbers that people who are foreign born have moved into a region. And so sometimes it's the contrast, right? Like that's great as a strategy and maybe we'll get some people to come back, but let's look at the macro numbers of what other growing communities like ours have experienced. How did Philadelphia, which is the other big city, right, in Pennsylvania that people always talk about, they reversed decades of population loss in the city. It all came because of growth in the immigrant population, right? So that's great. And then now that you have some best practices, You guys are implementing some of them. Now, you are an organization that was not founded per se by immigrants or just to focus on immigration. You're a broader, so you've already got a little bit of that enlistment thing already there because you are working from a mainstream. But as you think about some of the practices that you're trying to promote, are there practices in which you're trying to sort of build kind of a mind shift, a mindset shift in a partner? So it's like, hey, don't just create this program, but think about opening this program up to immigrants and continuing to do your program. Is there anything like that?
No, for sure. And just to kind of to speak a little bit to what you said previously, so we actually did speak to Welcome Center Philly, Welcome Center Indianapolis too, in terms of your conversation. But now with your current question, I would say it's actually something that we had to take a step back. So initially, when my our CEO was talking to me about trying to create a welcome center, to be honest, the sole focus initially seemed to be immigrants, actually. It was just now, especially given the current climate, that it was almost like we should take a step back. Not that it's not immigrant focused, but we should also focus on boomerangs, transplants, so many others in the region, just as much as I would focus on immigrants as well. So I think immigrants has always been somewhat of the focus. It's just trying to share that now with so many others. With you saying that, I would say again, the more that I talk to, because I see a lot of overlap even with this center, with the current work that grassroots organizations are doing here to serve our immigrant community. As we talk to, Steve and some that Sloan, I think you might be familiar with Pittsburgh a lot more than maybe some of our colleagues on the call are. But different incredible organizations here from Isaac Immigrant Services and Connections and Islamic Center of Pittsburgh, so many others, and we hear across the needs. And we did a focus group here with newcomers that were just moving here for work, right? A couple from Bogota, Colombia, someone from Shanghai. And I saw like generally, even as a refugee moving here, or as a highly skilled professional moving here, there was still some commonalities that you needed. You needed education on how do I apply for benefits in America? How do I navigate the healthcare system? And then how do I take those tools and say, well, how could this newcomer center help address those issues that meet the needs of this groups of people? I don't know if I'm answering your question, Steve, but
Absolutely.
that's my process.
Yeah. I will say that one thing you were saying reminds me of kind of a shift I've noticed at Welcome America a long time ago, maybe close to a decade ago, which was we were always talking about immigrant welcoming, and then we moved into talking about belonging. So you guys were talking about welcoming immigrants, and now you're talking about like welcoming everybody, boomerangers, et cetera, that kind of broader aligning immigrant inclusive economic development with inclusive economic development with economic development as part of that shift. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to switch. I see Alex is here. I'm going to let him take a stab at some of these questions, and then we're going to get to the questions in the chat. And if there's time, maybe we'll even do another one of these. Sloan, you're about to say something.
I
So.
just wanted to say thank you, Faye, for jumping in.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
And we're excited to see all the things that you're doing at Pittsburgh tomorrow today.
Thank you.
Alex, why don't you introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. My name is Alex Beck, and my actual job title is Welcoming Communities Manager. And I work for the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, which is about as traditional an economic development organization as you can come across. And we're in southern Vermont. So this is the corner of Vermont. We're right there in the corner around Massachusetts and New Hampshire.
Great. So do you have an economic development strategy that is important to your organization or community that you would like to kind of run through this exercise?
Absolutely. So, most people think about your local economic development organization as like your business parks. We did that. And about 10 years ago, we were asking all of our business leaders, what do you need? Do you need more space? Need more capital? And they're like, we need more people. Vermont is on average one of the oldest states. And so we looked at that data, and one of our strategies is increasing the size and quality of the workforce. That's my job as a workforce development professional.
Great. So you want to increase the size and quality of the workforce. And when you think about how research on immigrants and their demographics can help make a case for immigrant inclusion, like what are some of the data points or resources you would utilize to help make those points?
Yeah, so the cool thing for you all now is that there's really great economic data being collected on that. Way back in the day, 12 years ago, when we kind of started looking at this, we collected our own data. And so we had all of our companies say, what are your retirements looking like in the next 5 years? And it was, oh, geez, there was a way that silver tsunami was coming for us. And so then we looked at, well, what do other rural communities have that we don't? Why is our labor shortage so bad? And so we looked at South Dakota, we looked at rural Minnesota, we looked at other very rural communities, and the data was incredibly clear. Those communities have immigration, and we fundamentally did not in Southern Vermont and in the state, relative to other places of our size.
Yeah, where would you go? Like, where would you advise someone to go to establish those data points today?
So, the data that you saw in there was shared earlier was great. I dropped a link in the chat, and I would say the only difference is, and I'll do it again, is that Lightcast is a economic development organization. They are who the Fortune 500s hire to tell them, where do I build my next facility based on where the people are. And so these are the data sets. They're starting now to say the same thing. So what I'll say is, if you're talking to people who are already in favor of being inclusive, the data sets even other folks have shared are great. If you're talking to traditional economic development people, this is also a place where you can why are some particularly rural communities, but all communities, struggling so hard for labor. So these are the data points that we really led with.
Awesome. Great. And so then if you wanted, you obviously came up with some strategies, right? And I don't know if at the time you thought about where you went to research best practices, or where you would send somebody right now, like how do you find best practices at solving the problem that you mentioned?
Yep. So we kind of put the cart before the horse. My organization helped establish a refugee resettlement organization in Brattleboro. We thought it would be a slow roll, and then with the fall of Kabul, it was not very much that at all. It was but we immediately joined World Education Services SIP program, their Skilled Immigrant Integration program. We were lucky that the Rural Welcoming America program was coming online at that time too, and so Brattleboro had never seen refugee resettlement, at least in the last 30 years. And we got a big warm hug from other communities across the country in how to think about this. And then the last thing I'll say is then we ruralified it all. We learned from how big companies do it in large economies. And I said, okay, well, we're in a community of 12,000. What would it look like here? And so that is where we kind of begged, borrowed, and stole from other professional networks, but it wasn't one size fits all. And that's something that, a big learning that I took away.
That is a great point. And I want to just underscore that. I say this all the time, that like, even though Pittsburgh and Detroit or Cleveland and Detroit might share so much about our economies, about our communities, like the Pittsburgh model to building a welcoming and inclusive economy is going to be different from the Detroit model, and that each of those models should leverage, the individuals, the partners, the timing, the funding. And if population growth is a huge strategy in Michigan, but small business is what Ohio's governor wants to concentrate on, you should try to, catch that wave as opposed to fight up current and say, No, we have to do it exactly the way that some other organization or community did. So I appreciate you saying that. I know I believe you've participated in Welcoming America's Rural Communities Network.
Yep.
What are some of those other networks that you've drawn from?
So some of them are not related to immigrants at all. So, talent pipeline management is something I do with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. And that is focused on having your employers really articulate what the sticking point is in their labor challenges, right? And because they're in that process, they're not saying, and we want all of our empty jobs to be filled by Americans, right? That is not something that they do. It's we need more plumbers, we need more production manufacturers. With that knowledge, and then with again information and training we got from World Education Services and other immigrant specific organizations. The Tent Foundation has incredible resources and guidebooks as well, mentorship opportunities, Upwardly Global, all of these organizations. But it's where those things meet in the middle that I think is unique. Because what you want is that path of least resistance into high wage jobs. And so you can't ignore the jobs in your community or the employers in your community. And so that's really understanding. That is what has helped us really do that. And because we had all this labor market data, I knew the companies who are most hurting for employees. We were onboarding 5 or 6 Afghans at a time who did not speak any English, and like right into the workplace at like $18 an hour. So, and that was not a mistake. It was years of planning, understanding the labor market. And then as folks came in, some of that hard work was done already.
Great. Well, I want to make sure we get to these questions. So I know you're doing a ton of really great stuff. You're doing it as an economic development organization. So you kind of brought that sort of adoption from the mainstream economic development from the beginning. I guess the last thing I'll ask you, Alex, before we get to the questions in the chat is, what advice would you have for somebody who's like, maybe they're a mayor's office of welcoming, or they're coming from a refugee resettlement agency or a immigration organization, and they're looking to talk to their own talent pipeline organization locally? Like, how do they bridge that gap and how do they get their attention?
Um, it depends on how those folks, who they trust. Some folks they need, you can reach out to me, for instance, if you have a talent pipeline management group in your community, I'm a fellow with them. And so I can come in and say, hey, work with these folks. But also there's probably someone in your community who has that good relationship with your employers. And so in the same way that our new Americans and our immigrant community members benefit from cultural liaisons, spanning the nonprofit and the private sector, you might need a cultural liaison there too. So that is important that, there is, despite there are lots of challenges with capitalism between labor and capital, right? But at the end of the day, our goal is happy households that are receiving a high wage, and the employers need to be a part of that, and finding that common ground that we're all taking care of the community members together is what you're working towards. And so putting in those employers' heads, when our people succeed, your spots are filled. Your HR managers can focus on internal stuff instead of recruiting. You're not churning through employees. You're investing in someone who you hope to retain in your community long term. That might be you as the messenger, but it might be someone who can speak that other language of employers that you need to get on your team and push with you.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. And again, thanks for volunteering as well. I see Emily had a question, and then Jenna had a couple questions. And let me go to Emily's first question, which was, how confident over the next 3 years working with the current administration in the realization of your goal to welcoming immigrants? Well, I wish I had a great answer for you. I will say this: while I had pretty I cried tears when this last election happened, little tears, and had knew it was going to be really bad for immigrants. I would say that not a month goes by that it doesn't exceed sort of my dire kind of thoughts, and that is just continues to happen. And I will say though that I do believe that not only can our work succeed with a broad bipartisan group of supporters, even in a Trump-led world, a Stephen Miller-led world? Um, I think that our work is part of the answer to kind of coming out the other side of this and reversing this course. So what do I say about that? You know, there are times we have partners. They tend to be people who have been lifelong Republicans who, I don't know if they're never Trumpers or quietly never Trumpers, or whether they're maybe they like Trump and they wish he was a little less bombastic. But nonetheless, um, they use language that I don't feel comfortable using, right? Like they might say, well, let's say that this program is for legal immigrants, and I'm going to probably get to some of the questions about the second question from Jenna about the undocumented. So, a lot of what we do, and we do get funded to do, does require someone to have work authorization. Everybody who's an international student is coming with a visa, right? Like that's the community that we're predominantly serving. We're talking to employers about hiring them on the OPT portion of the visa. We do require in our skilled immigrant integration program that you be work authorized. And so, there's lots of things that we can be doing for those who have lawful presence, lawful status, and are work authorized. I will say, as a general matter for Global Detroit, our organization has long been issue agnostic. When we talk about spending dollars and population growth, everybody's included in that. That is not limited, and that somehow excludes undocumented people. And when the mayor of Detroit says, I want more people, I want people occupying vacant houses, I want more spending in the community, I want more workers, um, you know, um, honestly, he's not saying I only want workers and spending dollars and people who live in vacant homes who are documented. He's saying I just want those things to happen. And I think being broad in our scope allows that to happen. But nonetheless, I think there's lots of things that we could be doing. I think the talent crisis is going to continue, particularly as we see immigrants leaving or not coming. And I think the value of the work that we're doing is going to only is going to become more valuable. And so I do feel good that a lot of what we're doing, including our Welcoming Michigan campaign, like now for us to succeed, we have to double down on investing in this work. And it's taken a while, but we're starting to see some funders align with that and recognize that, of course, there were emergency needs around legal services and refugees that needed to be funded, but we're now seeing people investing in these longer term outcomes. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything about feelings with the current administration. I do think it's incumbent upon all of us to tell positive narratives around immigration and to help the 79% of Americans who answered the last Gallup poll and said that immigration is good for the country, to build off that majority to fight for the communities that we believe and fight for their inclusion. And so I think there's lots of work to do. I don't think that we're going to be out of like that our work won't have value because of the current administration. It says there, Jenna asks about, questions that she gets about all jobs being taken by immigrants, especially from special skilled workers. I would say a few things about that is, again, data can help tell your story. There are studies out there about how US born workers and communities benefit from immigrant folks, that indeed They create growth and new jobs, their presence that benefit workers, that their movement to a community actually helps lower unemployment and helps create higher incomes for everybody in the spectrum. And there's a lot of data on that, and that they tend to be complementary. But then the second thing is, I will say, we've always we've been careful in a purple state and in a city that is predominantly African American, where there are often, we hear this question a different way, which is like, how can you be talking about helping immigrants when we haven't done enough to help the African American community, right? This is, for us, very important that it's not an either or question, or that we're prioritizing immigrants over others. So, for example, when we launched our small business program, right, we very much targeted it towards African American business owners as well as immigrants. Now, there are going to be some things like an international student retention program that by nature we're serving an immigrant community, helping build inclusion for them, right? But when we get asked about, why, well, there's 70% of the electrical engineers, graduate students, 70% of the graduate students in electrical engineering are international students. Shouldn't we have more US born students in those programs? And the short answer for us is like, yeah, we should. And there's nothing we're doing that's trying to exclude them. And, when we're talking to a foundation, if you think investing in STEM education for, underrepresented communities is more important, that should be part of the pipeline as well. This silver tsunami is not going to be solved solely by immigrants, right? It's going to be solved by all of these strategies working in concert, and that inclusion begets inclusion, right? And it works for everyone. And so, in short, like, I don't think we're trying to say create job programs for immigrants over US born folks, but more about like creating inclusive access. And then finally, that, it is our belief, backed by data, that the inclusion of immigrants creates more opportunities for non-immigrant communities as well. And that is important. Finally, in terms of this question on undocumented workers, as I said, we're often status agnostic where we can be, and it's not an issue that we raise. As I mentioned, one of the ways to be inclusive of undocumented workers, depending on the political environment that you're working in, but those deeper dive map the impact studies have very specific data on undocumented, showing that they tend to be, educated, they tend to be in the workforce, hardworking, right? Like, I mean, that's probably out of necessity, like they don't qualify for welfare and other supports. One of the things that we could talk about, and we'll probably talk about next week, is not next week, but November, pathways to self-employment and entrepreneurship for undocumented who may find it more difficult to get jobs under the current kind of environment. I don't know if I missed any other questions since then. Great. Norma asked about supporting college-educated immigrants who are already here. World Education Services, or WES, Global Talent Bridge. And I'll put that and if you just Google WES Global Talent Bridge, you'll find there are a bunch of resources, including a network called Imprint that focuses on, particularly in the healthcare field, changing licensing policies on the state level to help those who come with degrees and credentials get licensed in their new communities in America. We've mentioned a couple times Upwardly Global. They're a national nonprofit that has a sort of software portal to that many workforce development agencies and welcoming initiatives partner with, and that software guides those kinds of skilled immigrant professionals through workplace policies. As I mentioned, in Michigan, we use state dollars to fund our workforce agencies to have specific job coaches at 5 of the agencies across the state in the 5 most populous regions where immigrants thrive, but the program is open to anyone. And I don't know if it's still the case, but you used to go to the state workforce agency and the #1 banner on their website was, if you have a college degree from another country and are, struggling to connect with your profession, click here and we'll link you with a coach. There's some really wonderful work in the healthcare space by something called Welcome Back Centers. This is probably the one area that we work in where there's lots of technical expertise and support across the country for college educated immigrants. Anything else in the chat or things to talk about?
Thank you.
So if Megan can put up the slides, I think I'm right? Like we're entering the last few minutes. That flew by. Sorry I talk so much. We just wanted to make sure you had these resources and remind you of the next thing. Really important is that Gateways for Growth is coming up at the end of this month. This is a great opportunity to get more technical assistance and data to get a sort of curated data report for your community, but also technical assistance about moving into Welcoming Economies programming. And this is a joint program of Welcoming America and the American Immigration Council. So many, many very successful Welcoming Economies programs, welcoming initiatives, immigrant inclusive economic development initiatives can trace a history to, I think this is round 6 or 7 to Gateways of Growth, and they come out usually like every other year or so. So it's the end of the month. I'm sorry, I don't have that. I think it's September 29th, but I made that date up. But you want to check that out and see if you can get an application in. And then go to the next slide. But for the ePluribus network, oh, that was it. Okay. Am I missing a slide? I don't know the end of this.
We just have contact information, I think, on the next
great.
one.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to get to. Right. So if there's contact, if you want to contact us, please do. We love to hear from you. For the Global Detroit ePluribus team, you can contact Lauren. And from Welcoming America, you can contact Lola. And you can also stop any one of us, including Alex and Faya and other people that you saw in the chat. This is a collaborative space. Long ago, we defeated the notion that somehow if Detroit did a great job in welcoming immigrants, it would hurt Toledo or Cleveland. We're all fighting against an anti-immigrant xenophobia, and that this country can grow and be its best self and greatest self when we're all on the welcoming page. And welcoming immigrants in South Dakota helps welcome immigrants in Michigan's Upper Peninsula and even in Detroit. And so we look forward to hearing from you, and no question's a bad question, and no, whether it's a data point or a strategy point, please reach out to us.